Karina Okotel, and this is my new show, The Weekly Wrap-Up, coming to you from my home in Melbourne on day 2 of our second lockdown, courtesy of Premier Andrews. Why are we back here again? If it wasn't such a devastating situation, the answer would truly be a comedy of errors. This post from a restaurant owner on the Victorian Peninsula sums it up. She writes, "We had 0 cases, allowed nitwits to manage the only people, returned travellers, who had the virus. What could possibly have gone wrong? Throw in a protest for 10,000 people with no fines. What were people to expect to think? If they can do it, so will we. Packed shopping centres, religious celebrations with 50 guests in a house, security guards, I use that term loosely, in hotel quarantine, sleeping with infected people, taking them to 7-Eleven, not using protective gear, and all totally unsupervised. Then going home, shopping, driving Ubers. It beggars belief. The ADF were turned away. Shame on you, Daniel Andrews. Shame on the Labor Party in Victoria. You caused this. This is completely on your heads. Tonight I sit here counselling my team, cancelling bookings, sending back stock to suppliers again, as are the rest of our industry tonight. Not one case here on the peninsula, yet suddenly we are Metro Melbourne. An apology would be a good start." But rather than taking responsibility, the Victorian Labor government blames the people they were elected to govern, that Melbournians are somehow more reckless and irresponsible than the rest of the country. But any recklessness occurred under the Victorian government's watch. The malfeasance under Labor's administration in mismanaging this pandemic now leaves those who had lost jobs or just returned to employment in continued uncertainty about their economic future. Businesses that barely survived the first lot of restrictions are now contemplating their capacity to survive this second wave. Lines outside of Centrelink show no sign of abating, and organisations providing material aid are just not coping with demand. Any job openings are being flooded with applications, and many job hunters wonder when they'll have the opportunity to regain employment when they're not even receiving an acknowledgement for the applications they're submitting. Parents and children who struggled last time and are already anxious about returning to remote learning next week. People who bought investment properties or rent out to holidaymakers are wondering how they're going to pay another mortgage without the anticipated income. And as business shuts down, the impact on consultancy and legal services is profound.
Obviously, we struggled through the last lockdown, and it's going to happen again. It's sad for especially the younger generation that I've got working here. That unfortunately, I've probably got 8 on JobKeeper. Then the rest of my staff, with 30 staff here, there's nothing available to them. So the tears yesterday, the tears amongst the staff, the disappointment was phenomenal. It's killing me to see them, not being able to survive, pay their rent. They live week to week. A lot of the younger generation that especially work in hospitality. I mean, I'm just disappointed. I'm going to go out there. Dan should have just put his hand up yesterday when he made his announcement. He should have resigned as well. He's pointing the finger at all us Victorians when a lot of us have been doing the right thing. He and his government have let us all down, and it's horrible. So Dan, please resign. Stand up and man up. Enough's enough. It's horrible.
What do you think he should have done?
What do I think he should have done? Maybe the first time hold the restrictions back a week or two. What? Let a rally go ahead. A 10,000 people rally. Let that go ahead. Come on, let's be honest. If you're going to do something, do it properly. You're still allowed to go to Bunnings. A lot of other businesses are allowed to survive, yet we got told to sit down, shut up and stop. Not fair.
In particular, for those who have lost or reduced work, for those who are already unemployed or are living alone, 6 or more weeks of stage 3 restrictions without meaningful activity, on top of increased financial stress, will undoubtedly have a toll on people's mental well-being. But according to Premier Andrews, the situation us Melbournians find ourselves in is of our own making. After this lockdown, what happens if we have a 3rd or 4th wave of infection? The Victorian government hadn't put in place any risk management procedures before this second wave. If their deplorable inaction continues, the Victorian economy, but more importantly, people's financial futures, could be permanently crippled. We'll no longer be talking about a recession, but a depression. The government has made no moves to boost the capacity of our healthcare system to manage high patient numbers if infection rates continue to rise or come back in further waves. The only solution Premier Andrews has pointed to is a vaccine that may never come. This week, he tweeted that in the absence of a vaccine, the only way to defeat this virus is to deprive it of what it needs to spread. I agree, Premier Andrews, and all it needs to spread is you. Now, when environmentalist and climate activist Michael Schellenberger released his book Apocalypse Never, Why Environmental Alarmism Hurts Us All last week, debunking climate alarmism, I thought, surely now governments would sit up and say, we simply can't keep agreeing that the science is settled and that climate change poses an existential threat. In an opinion piece in The Australian, Schellenberger pointed to scientific research, including that of the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which showed that humans are not causing a sixth mass extinction. Climate change is not making natural disasters worse. Fires have declined 25% around the world since 2003. The amount of land we use for meat, humankind's biggest use of land, has declined by an area nearly as large as Alaska. The buildup of wood fuel and more houses near forests, not climate change, explain why there are more and more dangerous fires in Australia and California. Carbon emissions are declining in most rich nations and have been declining in Britain, Germany, and France since the mid-1970s. And habitat loss and the direct killing of wild animals are bigger threats to species than climate change. All this week, I've been thinking, now surely they will at least pause freaking out our children with climate alarmism in schools until Schellenberger's claims can be tested. Protecting our environment is critical, and teaching our children to be good stewards of the earth and its resources is necessary. But raising their anxiety that climate change will end their lives is unconscionable. Schellenberger even called out the Gestapo-like tactics of the climate change industry, saying, I even stood by as people in the White House and many in the media tried to destroy the reputation and career of an outstanding scientist, good man, and friend of mine, Roger Pielke Jr., a lifelong progressive Democrat and environmentalist who testified in favour of carbon regulations. Why did they do that? Because his research proves natural disasters aren't getting worse. But no, nothing. Not a murmur from government on the issue. So what will it take for government to move on from the propaganda that the science is settled? Maybe more brave climate activists speaking up? But with the risk of losing funding and being shunned, this is a tall order. What irked me most on Q&A this week? This could well become a regular segment, as I don't think I could ever run out of things that give me the irrits on Q&A. The only thing that might prevent this is my capacity to bring myself to fortify my stomach enough to watch the show in the first place. But here's a bit of a gold nugget from this week's show.
Yeah, thanks. The Prime Minister, speaking of Prime Minister, Scott Morrison has warned Australia needs to prepare for a post-COVID world that's poorer and it's more dangerous and more disorderly. Do you think that's true? What dangers is the Prime Minister talking about, and where is it going to be more disorderly? Putting Scott Morrison's warning in the context of the recent defence spending announcement, I'm getting the feeling that the Prime Minister is preparing us for war. I hope you can tell me I'm wrong.
Terry Butler.
Well, look, those were very confronting words, I think, from the Prime Minister. And I think at the moment when we're facing some pretty spectacularly difficult problems, I mean, of course, there is a lot of change in the region and in the world. The power dynamics are shifting between nations. We've got the United States, which I think a lot of countries would like to see once again return to playing a bit more of an active and consistent role in world affairs. We've got different countries rising in terms of their power and their wealth. All of those things, I think, are important. At the same time, we've also got this global pandemic, which is creating incredible anxiety across the world. And of course, there's always the spectre of climate change. I don't know if that's what Scott Morrison is referring to, but it's certainly on my mind in terms of major risks facing the planet.
According to the Labor Shadow Minister, Terry Butler, need for greater defence spending is about shifting power balances. Sure. The coronavirus, sure. And wait for it, Climate change. No mention of China's continued unauthorized militarization of the South China Sea. Pay no mind to China's recent cyber attacks on Australian government agencies and businesses. Australians now being at risk of arbitrary detention in China isn't of importance. There doesn't seem to be an issue around China dramatically increasing tariffs on Australian barley or China's ambassador saying his people might lose their appetite for Australian beef and wine. No. The threat we must defend ourselves against is climate change. That's it from me tonight. Have a great weekend and see you next week from lockdown in Melbourne to wrap up the week's news once again. Thanks for watching. Remember to visit goodsource.news and subscribe, like this post, leave a comment, and we'll see you next week.